Sometimes, the worst disasters don't begin with explosions. They start with a whisper, a lie, a decision made behind closed doors. On the night of April 26, 1986, that lie turned a sleeping Soviet town into a radioactive nightmare. At exactly 1:23 a.m., reactor number 4 exploded. But it wasn't just steel and concrete that shattered. It was trust, truth, and the future of an entire generation. The world would remember it as Chernobyl. But what they don't remember is what was hidden beneath the ashes. Lies that killed thousands. Heroes who were erased from history. Secrets that may still be buried even today. In this video, we're going deeper than any documentary, any drama, or any government report ever dared. Behind the cover-ups, behind the radiation, behind the fear. This isn't just a story about an explosion. It's the story of the darkest truth ever buried. April 25th, 1986. It was a quiet evening in the industrial town of Pripyat. Workers were returning home, children playing in the parks, and the sun slowly setting behind the horizon. Everything seemed normal, maybe too normal. Inside the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, something was very wrong. That night was scheduled for a safety test, just a simple check to see if the backup generators could keep the core running after a power outage. But this test was ordered at the worst possible time, during the night shift, when the most inexperienced staff were in control. The engineers were tired, some were new, but in the Soviet Union, you didn't question orders. From the moment the test began, mistakes started piling up. The reactor behaved unpredictably. Its power levels dropped, surged, and dropped again. But instead of aborting the test, they pushed forward. Warning lights lit up the control panel. Safety protocols were bypassed. The reactor was unstable, but no one stopped it. At exactly 1:23 a.m., a critical surge, a series of wrong buttons, a few seconds of chaos, and then the core exploded. A blast so powerful it launched a 1,000-ton steel lid into the sky. Radiation flooded the air, but the silence that followed was louder than the explosion. There were no alarms, no evacuation, just firemen walking toward glowing death, with nothing but water hoses and cotton uniforms. While Reactor 4 burned, the lies began to spread. Officials stayed quiet. The people of Pripyat still had no idea their lives had already ended. And this was only the beginning, because the disaster of Chernobyl didn't start with the explosion. It started with denial. At first glance, Chernobyl looked like a technical failure, a reactor malfunction. But the real story is much darker. Because yes, human error caused the explosion. But what turned it into a global catastrophe was a lie. A lie born from a system that feared the truth. Right after the explosion, local officials knew something was wrong. But instead of sounding the alarm, evacuating the city, or warning the people, they chose to do nothing. Not out of ignorance, but out of fear. Fear of admitting a mistake. Fear of the Communist Party's wrath. Fear of losing control of the image they had spent decades building. For 36 hours, the people of Pripyat lived as if nothing had happened. The sky was blue. Children played. Adults went to work. But with every breath, they were inhaling death. Radiation, silent, invisible, and merciless, was already inside them. And the government? Completely silent, even as people started coughing blood, even as their skin burned without flames. They said, everything is under control. There were scientists who tried to speak up, to warn the world, but they were silenced. Some were arrested, some disappeared, some were never seen again. The government wasn't fighting the reactor, it was fighting the truth. Instead of fixing the problem, they went looking for someone to blame. They pointed fingers at the operators, called it human error. But the truth? The reactor design itself was flawed. Engineers knew it for years, but in the Soviet Union, no one was allowed to speak up.
пространства. Вот в советской атомной энергетике вот третий элемент, ну, с моей точки зрения, преступно был проигнорирован. К этому времени тоже международный стандарт сложился, требующий именно 3 элементов безопасности. Значит, надежный реактор, надежная эксплуатация и обязательный контейнмент. Если бы была философия, связанная с обязательностью вот контейнмента над каждым из атомных объектов, то естественно...
One official said, "If we admit this is our fault, then the whole system is flawed, and we are not allowed to fail." That's when the decision was made. Truth doesn't matter. People don't matter. Only the image of the state must survive. Eventually, when the radiation reached Sweden and the world started asking questions, the Soviet Union finally admitted an incident has occurred. But by then, it was already too late. In Chernobyl, it wasn't just a reactor that exploded. A regime did. And the sound of that blast still echoes in history. Not because of the fire, but because of the lies that killed. At 1:28 a.m., just 5 minutes after the explosion, an emergency call arrived at fire station number 2 in Pripyat.
Алло, это ВПЧ-2? Да. Что у вас говорит? На главном корпусе, между 3 и 4. А там люди есть? Да. И люди есть, да? Да. И в результате взрыва что там горит? Отметка 12. На отметке плюс 12, 7-я машина.
But what awaited them was death. Vasily Ignatenko, the fire chief, was the first to arrive at the scene. He saw with his own eyes that the roof had been destroyed, glowing graphite scattered on the ground, and smoke that wasn't gray but blue. But even at that moment, he didn't know that what he was seeing was radioactive death. They had no special gear, no masks, no protective clothing, no understanding of the real danger. Only water hoses and hearts made of steel. The firefighters entered the heart of the fire without hesitation. On the roof, next to the exploded reactor, as with each passing second, a deadly dose of radiation was entering their bodies. In just a few hours, their skin started to burn. From the inside, their lips cracked, their bodies blistered, and their organs began to fail one by one. Vasily was one of the first victims. Days later, in a hospital in Moscow, while Lyudmila was by his side, he slowly passed away, but his body was still so contaminated that they buried him in a metal coffin. Many of the firefighters who went into the plant that night didn't even live to see the sunrise. Heroes who, with no protection, faced something that couldn't be seen, couldn't be heard, but could kill. The government hid their heroism for a long time. Their names didn't appear on official lists. Some of their families were even forced to stay silent in the name of national security. But today, after decades, the world knows that these men with their own lives prevented an even greater catastrophe. And maybe that's what heroism means. Doing what's right, even when no one is watching, even when you're never meant to come back. By now, everyone thought the worst had already happened. But the truth was, the worst was yet to come. Chernobyl was on the verge of turning half of Europe into an uninhabitable wasteland. After the explosion, burning graphite and molten nuclear fuel were slowly sinking deeper into the ground. And beneath the reactor, massive tanks filled with cold water. If the molten core reached that water, it would trigger a second explosion, one so powerful. Experts said it would rival Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Complete annihilation. Kyiv, Minsk, even parts of Europe, gone. Millions dead. Civilization, erased. The engineers were terrified. Time was running out. Every minute, the molten core crept closer to the water. There was only one solution. The water had to be drained. But who would do it? Going beneath the reactor meant facing certain death. Radiation so intense, it would burn a human alive within minutes. In the end, 3 men volunteered: Valery Bezpalov, Alexei Ananenko, and Boris Baranov. 3 men in total darkness, armed only with weak flashlights, wading through radioactive water, searching for a single valve, the only hope left. That night, the 3 of them pushed forward with unbreakable will, and finally, they found it. They opened the valve, the water drained, and Europe was saved. For years, people believed the 3 men had died. But the truth? At least 2 of them survived for many years afterward. Silent warriors. Heroes history never properly honored. Sometimes history isn't written by armies or emperors. It's written by 3 unknown men with flashlights and unimaginable courage. When the smoke cleared and the fires died down, many thought the disaster was over. But the real enemy was just beginning to work. Silent, colorless, odorless, radiation, a death that crept in quietly and burned from the inside out. People had no idea what they were walking into. Soldiers were ordered to patrol the reactor zone. Workers were told to clean the wreckage. Families still lived in nearby towns. No one warned them. The air itself was toxic. Radiation was spreading far beyond the reactor, not just in Chernobyl. It reached Sweden, Germany, even Italy. But still, the Soviet government remained silent, even as people started coughing, even as their skin blistered, even as clumps of hair began to fall. The media kept saying, everything is under control. Doctors in hospitals were seeing things they'd never seen before. Burns without fire, bleeding with no wounds. Immune systems collapsing from the inside. Bodies were rotting from within. And the worst part? Death wasn't quick. Many suffered for weeks, even months. Cells breaking down, organs failing, and the doctors completely powerless. That's when the horrifying truth came out. Chernobyl wasn't just an industrial accident. It was a silent scientific nightmare. A moment where science broke loose, and humans were no longer in control. Death doesn't always come with a gunshot. Sometimes it enters through your lungs, and by the time you realize it, it's already too late. On the morning after the explosion, the city of Pripyat woke up like it was just another day. Children went to school, families ate breakfast. No one knew. The air was filled with death. No alarms, no warnings, just a strange orange glow in the night sky. Some thought it was the northern lights. Some thought it was the reactor lighting up. But in truth, that glow was a mix of radioactive dust, toxic gas, and death. 49 hours passed. Then finally the people of Pripyat were told to evacuate. But even then, no one told them the real reason. They were simply told, "You're going on a short trip. Bring only what you need." So many left without warm clothes, left their pets, their photos, their homes, everything left behind forever. As people boarded the buses, something else was happening behind the scenes. KGB agents were listening to every phone call. Hospitals were filling up with strange cases, but doctors were forbidden from even whispering the word radiation. Journalists who tried to speak out were censored or silenced. Some disappeared. One doctor later said, "We were watching people die, and we weren't even allowed to say why." Meanwhile, in Sweden and Germany, nuclear sensors were going crazy. Something big had happened in the USSR. The world was screaming from the outside. But inside the Soviet Union, there was only silence, until finally, the state TV made one cold, vague announcement. An accident has occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Measures are being taken. That one sentence was the only official information about one of the worst disasters in human history. No one told the truth, that by then, thousands had already been exposed to lethal levels of radiation, that children playing in the parks would grow up with rare, aggressive cancers, that the entire thing could have been prevented if just one person had told the truth before telling a lie. When the fires were finally out and the silence returned, one terrifying question remained. Now what? The reactor was still alive, melted, broken, but breathing, releasing invisible particles. Scientists warned that if the radiation continued to leak, Chernobyl wouldn't just be a disaster. It would be the beginning of something far worse. A drop of radioactive water in the wrong place could ignite a second catastrophe. A gust of wind could poison another city. So they made a decision. They would build something, a wall, a barrier, a coffin, to bury the monster they had created. They called it the sarcophagus, a massive concrete shell weighing thousands of tons designed to trap reactor 4 forever. But building it wasn't easy. Thousands of workers returned to the zone of death. Engineers, soldiers, civilians, all exposed to radiation. They knew they might not survive, but they went anyway. Some of them became known as the liquidators, men who ran across the reactor's roof, throwing chunks of burning graphite back into the core with just a shovel. No real protection. 45 seconds. That's all they had. After that, their bodies began to burn from the inside. At last, after months of relentless work, the sarcophagus was complete, a giant cage of steel and concrete, and inside it the reactor was sealed. This was not the end. The structure was only temporary. Over time, it cracked. Radiation began to leak again. Once more, the danger returned. And once more, people had to stand against a disaster they themselves had created. Chernobyl wasn't just a mistake. It was a warning about pride, about lies, and about the price future generations must pay for the secrets of a powerful regime. Today, the sarcophagus still stands, gray, silent, but underneath it, a monster still breathes.